Good afternoon. At this time, we'd like to call to order the City Council Rail Committee meeting for Tuesday, March 10th, 2026. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Just as an announcement, broadcasting will be on channel 29 instead of channel 26. Councilmember Lithcott-Hames?
Here.
Councilmember Burt?
Here.
Councilmember Lowing?
Here.
For the record, 3 present.
Great. At this time, we have an opportunity for members of the public to speak on items that are not otherwise on the agenda, but are within the purview of this committee. Do we have any speakers?
If any member of the public would like to speak on an item not on the agenda, please raise your hand or press *9 now. We have no request to speak.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Oh.
We have one here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm John Melnichuk. Thank you, committee members and council members, for your long work into the night, wrestling with difficult problems, including our troublesome railway. You've heard me speak before. I'm an across the street neighbor of the railway, and I wanted to acknowledge and thank XCAP and other volunteers for working hard along with City Council and Chairman Burt, Lithcott-Hames, and Councilmember Lowing to improve the safety of our railway. You've devoted an enormous amount of time in a big crisis again. And I want to acknowledge that the pressure's on, and I respect the difficulty and complexity of decisions that you're making on our behalf. I'm here to comment about a viaduct option that's been promoted recently in the news, and I would object to it as a neighbor of the Caltrain. We'll lose daylight, we'll lose privacy, we'll have more noise, property values will diminish, and we'll have a punishing multi-year problem with construction. None of that's really been laid out or explained to us in the city about the process of promulgating any of the unfavorable options that we're faced with. If it's 6 or 8 years of trucks up and down Alma Street with shoe fly tracks, that's a problem for me. It'll make me move from the city that I love and worked in for 25 years. It's not a small aesthetic issue about the viaduct or the berm. They're very hard problems to solve. Right now, you're going to be talking soon about closing Churchill Avenue. That leads to another set of complications. And I'm not satisfied yet that CEQA has been met for the studies of the options that are before you. And the reason I say that is because it talks about the engineering, but it doesn't talk about the neighborhood impacts. Nowhere have I seen any documents. I've looked hard for them. I'll be happy to read anything that comments or reassures neighbors of the Caltrain that their property values won't be diminished, that they won't be having 24-hour-a-day noise and dust and trucks rumbling up and down with constant tie-ups on Alma Street. And I want to just, I don't want to cause any offense, but I feel like our city by itself is trying to solve $1 billion problem, and it doesn't really have the expertise to do that. High-speed rail hasn't been well managed. That's pretty clear. We've got $1 billion project in front of us. Our track record in the city, we've got a beautiful public safety building. We've got a beautiful Mitchell Park Library. Both are over budget by quite a long time with lawsuits following. And I don't know, and they're 1/6 the size or 1/10 the size of a Great Separation project. So just like with the RV problem, I'm sorry, we need to have regional.
Your time has
coordination
expired.
around
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your work and for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to our updates from interagency activities, and the first is from Caltrain. Navi.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee, city staff, and members of the public. My name is Navi Dhaliwal, and I'm Caltrain's Government Community Affairs Manager. Before getting into project updates, I wanted to briefly highlight ridership across all, and I'm actually hoping that I can do this at every meeting that I attend with you all, because I think, Councilmember Burt has such a strong familiarity with ridership, and it's talked about, but I wanted to just encompass that with some numbers. So, and if we wouldn't mind pulling up maybe switching to the next slide, please, for this update. Perfect. Thank you so much. So across all Palo Alto stations combined, Caltrain served approximately 140,000 riders in January of 2026. And that's with respect to origin station, so where they're starting their destination, which reflects the continued importance of these stations for regional mobility. And so I just wanted to take a moment to just highlight what an incredible opportunity that is. And like I had mentioned, we take data from a month after. And so what you're seeing today is the January numbers, and then I'm hoping I can return with those February details and month after month. On safety enhancements, Caltrain has implemented baseline improvements at crossings in Palo Alto, including delineators, solar markers, and with the city's partnership, refreshed crossing, striping, and pavement markings to improve visibility and guide pedestrian and vehicle movements. In addition to these baseline improvements, Palo Alto is serving as a pilot location for 2 safety technologies. So I believe you all have heard this, but we have anti-trespass panels and rail sentry intrusion detection and monitoring. Anti-trespass panels were installed last week at the Churchill Avenue and East Meadow crossings, and additional installations at Alma Street and Charleston Road are pending. Material delivery, which we expect in about a week to 2 weeks. We are also planning to install rail sentry intrusion detection and monitoring at the Alma Street crossing on March 16th, and so we'll continue to keep you all apprised on whether that date shifts, but we're holding strong on that March 16th date. And these pilot programs will be evaluated before any broader implementation, but we appreciate the City of Palo Alto's partnership and allowing us to test and really understand these technologies here in the city. On the grade separation program side of the house, Caltrain is currently in partnership with the city advancing the 15% design for the Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston crossings. We anticipate finalizing the design plans in early summer, followed by completion of the independent cost estimate and construction schedule later in the summer. This spring, we will also continue community engagement and coordinate environmental technical studies while initiating procurement for the consultant team that will advance the project into the 35% design phase. And I'm actually joined online by Jill Gibson and Edgar Torres. They're, very sad they couldn't make it in person, but they're available to help answer any questions that may come up with the grade separation program. As well as Ripon to my right, who's been working very closely with us on the city side of the house. Just a note, and we are hoping that we can return to Rail Committee with this update, but we are also kicking off work on the San Francisco Creek Bridge project. And so Caltrain hosted the first introductory technical advisory committee meeting yesterday, which included staff from the City of Palo Alto, Menlo Park, the San Francisco Creek JPA, and Stanford. We recognize that this project will require coordination with a number of stakeholders, including our Palo Alto City staff partners here today. And we look forward to continuing to coordinate closely as this work progresses, but want to be sure that we can attend a future Rail Committee meeting to discuss the scope of this project in more detail and what the next steps will look like. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And as a reminder, I'd mentioned Jill and Edgar from the Caltrain program team are available to answer questions as well.
Ed?
Is the 140,000 riders, is that trips or riders?
It's trips from origin station is what they count.
So if I go from here to San Francisco and back, is that one?
No, it's origin station. So it goes trips leaving Palo Alto. Yep, once.
Count for one? Okay. Thank you.
Nothing but gratitude. Thank you so much, Navi.
Couple of things. Following up on Ed's question, Palo Alto remains, even though we have fewer workers in the city than we did pre-COVID, an overwhelmingly large employment base in relation to our number of residents. And so counting by origin would significantly underestimate the trips in Palo Alto. So I hadn't appreciated that it was all origin as opposed to origin and destination divided by 2. Is this the way we've always done it at Caltrain?
That was a dashboard that I had pulled from, so what we
Okay.
have available online, but I'm happy to do some additional digging and at the next Rail Committee provide an update that does maybe find some of that detail and data. So I'll work with our service planning team to see if we can pull those numbers.
It's considerably less workers in the city today, but pre-COVID it was estimated 105,000 workers and 67,000 residents. So over 3 times as many jobs as employed workers in the city. So it's an inbound commute predominantly, not exclusively. And similarly, our station, at particular university, and that's where most of our trips are, serves Stanford, and there's a huge inbound trip volume to Stanford daily as well. On the San Francisco Creek planning, that was great. I want to make sure everybody knew that in addition to the longer term planning on the future of the bridge, we have a very large, expensive project on the nearer term repairs. And I'm not remembering the exact dollar amount and the timing, but it was a lot. I don't know if you recall, but I want to make sure people were aware that that also is happening and in a near-term timeframe. We just approved the contract at Caltrain, right?
Correct. Yes. So I don't have the number, but I am happy to come at the next rail committee to provide just an update as I did today to highlight what that scope of work will look like. As you remember, Councilmember Burt, this is a project that was previously an emergency stabilization. And so we went in and had done enough work just to stabilize the embankment of the bridge. And so now this next scope of work is what we were partnering with the City Public Works Department here in Palo Alto and Menlo Park to do a greater scope where we permanently stabilize underneath the bridge itself, as well as the bike and pedestrian bridge. And so I can update more, as I mentioned, more details with the numbers, but that is available for members of the public who are interested and have an appetite for that information. It was at the previous technology operations planning, what we call the TOPS committee, where Councilmember Burt sits on for Caltrain.
Great. So we got 3 stages. We did the emergency. Now we have this interim kind of permanent bank stabilization, and then the longer term, what's going to happen to a bridge that's over 100 years old. And that bridge is up against the El Palo Alto tree. And I want to make sure that, that Caltrain has received the documentary film that they have. Okay.
Yes, we have sent that information.
Good. Thank you. And do we have that linked on our website? If we don't, it might be a good thing.
I can take a look at it.
Yeah, it's I think a lot of people would be interested in it. It's very well done, including by student filmmakers.
About El Palo Alto?
Yeah. And then I did want to just share related to Caltrain that we at the local policymaker group, which Councilmember Lowing, are you still our representative? Yeah. Again, yes. We got an update from the California High-Speed Rail on their new business plan. It was sort of a preview because they released it officially a day or two days later. And there are significant changes in the business plan that impact Caltrain and even the future of high-speed rail on the Peninsula Corridor. And so the headline is that the project has been reduced in cost by about $2 billion from 125 billion and change to 123 or so. And then the representative said, well, actually, they had reduced the cost by over 75 billion, which didn't quite make sense until they further explained that, well, the scope of the project that had always been the case up until this business plan has been shrunk. And so the historic scope of getting trains to LA, from LA to San Francisco is no longer the project. It's high-speed rail to Palmdale, and then a link to an upgraded metro link to LA, and high-speed rail to Gilroy, and then some future undefined funding and plan to get it from Gilroy to San Jose and then San Francisco. I will add that in the prep meeting, the representative talked about different ways that they're brainstorming about how to get it from Gilroy to San Jose, and one option is to push it with diesel engines from the rear. Just thought I'd share that. And then they still have great challenges on even completing the Central Valley section and whether they have funding to do that, and no funding identified beyond that Central Valley section. Because there would be two different transfers, the transit time they haven't defined, but it's probably in the 5 to 6 hour range. So those are pretty, and there are other elements to the plan. It's very significant changes. They actually in the report, and I'm not sure how the math changed, but they actually said that the previous plan would cost $231 billion. But the headline is that they've reduced the cost by $2 billion. So I just want to share that and let you decide what to make of it. Okay, so our next update is, do we have anything from VTA?
No update from BT.
Okay. And then that takes us to the city staff report.
Good afternoon again. Ripan Bhatia, Senior Engineer with the Office of Transportation. Next slide, please. So we have few project updates that we have ongoing and have brought forward to the Rail Committee previously. The first one we can touch upon is the Bike and Ped Transportation Plan update. So the draft plan was reviewed by PTC in November and recommended for adoption by PTC, and is going forward to the payback review on May 7th. It's open to public for if you have any interest from the community to provide any feedback. And the final adoption of the Bike and Ped Transportation Plan is tentatively scheduled in early June. Next slide, please. There's another safety improvement project that is currently in progress at Alma and Charleston. This is also funded through California Public Utilities Commission's Section 130 funds. The city have recently had a community meeting, actually in late last year, a community meeting for seeking input and feedback from our community. It was a great meeting with a good input, and so the staff will take those input into consideration as we move forward with the design. And also it is scheduled for payback in April for the review. So another opportunity for our community to provide any feedback. And we also plan to bring this project for Rail Committee's review at the next meeting. Next slide, please. Finally, quiet zone projects are progressing forward. The Palo Alto quiet zone improvements were completed in accordance with the plans. We had a FRA and CPUC field review where they identified some additional improvements, such as extending the median island and changing some additional signage. We are working with the contractor to develop to provide that those improvements, and we'll seek another review by FRA and CPUC before coming to the council for notice of implementation. For Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston, council approved the concepts and recommended staff to move forward directed staff to move forward with procurement of funding and design of the improvements required to implement the quiet zone at Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston crossing. Staff is securing funding through our budget approval process in the next fiscal year, and also currently working on request for proposal process and procurement with the procurement staff as well as with Caltrans to ensure that both agencies are integrated and working together for the design of these improvements. And that concludes my staff report, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatia. Could you just say a little bit more about the safety improvements being made at Alma Charleston?
So the safety improvements that are being considered are similar to what we have provided at Churchill Avenue. So that would include pre-signal, signal coordination, ensuring that there's adequate timings for the pedestrian and bicycle, signing, striping, and signal modifications. So those are the improvements in consideration at a high level, but we'll bring back that concept plans for your review at the next meeting.
I just appreciate you articulating it because I think there's so much happening around rail safety at times 4 crossings and so on that I think for anybody listening, it's just extra helpful to be specific on what we mean this time when we say safety improvements, because they might think we're talking about the safety monitors, the human beings that have been contracted with to, increase the sense of safety there. So thank you.
And that's part of why I've really tried to push that we distinguish between safety and security. And that gives, I think, a clearer understanding that what Ripon was talking about was really vehicular safety, in addition to what Navi had already spoken about on the security that's ahead of that and nearly complete. Ed, did you have anything?
It's kind of all connected back even to Churchill. So you on the Caltrain comments, you said that you're in the process of doing more, have just completed more processes at Churchill, right? I'm to Navi.
Yes,
to Navi now.
correct. Yeah, Caltrain has completed some of these other safety improvements,
Right.
enhancements.
And so those are the ones that are going to be over time installed here at Alma and Charleston.
So I think that there are 2 different types of safety improvements. The ones that Ripon were talking about were safety improvements on the city side, so they relate to the signals. The ones that Navi was talking about were the ones safety enhancements on the Caltrain side, so those include like the anti-trespass panels and the sentry system, that sort of thing. And so you can speak to the plan for those ones.
Yeah, so we anticipate, we're pending installation for Alma Street for the anti-trespass panels. And so we're expecting those within the next, I believe, like week to 2 weeks on those panels. And then for the rail sentry at Alma, we are anticipating that will be installed on March 16th.
So
Does that answer your question?
Rail Sentry was already installed at Churchill in the spring. And then in recent weeks, it was installed at Meadow and Charleston and will be at Palo Alto Avenue soon, as Navi said. The anti-trespass panels have already been installed in just the last couple of weeks at both Churchill and Meadow. And they, in the next couple of weeks, will also be installed at Charleston and Palo Alto Avenue.
and the rail sentry had already been installed before the latest tragedy, right?
Yes. And the rail sentry is a good technology, but is not designed to address the sort of circumstance that occurred recently. On top of that, even within what it is designed to do, which is to improve both safety for vehicles and prevent trespassing, it's far from a fail-safe technology because it requires the LiDAR or the video cameras to detect either a predetermined pattern of a vehicle or a person being where they shouldn't be for X seconds too long, or with the AI, some irregular behavior, but then it has to go to the dispatch with the company that owns Rail Sentry, then to our dispatch to the trains and stop the train. Each of those is a lag time. There is the next generation of Rail Sentry that's currently being tested on Metrolink in Los Angeles that will bypass that first step, which will improve it, but still far from make it fail safe. So we wish it was more instantaneous than it's capable of being. It's a good addition, and really would address a lot of our historic intrusions, but it is no one approach is anywhere near fail-safe. Yeah, Julie?
Thank you for clarifying that. Um, the way that my brain works, I would love to see a chart that maybe had the 4 crossings and the types of safety and security measures, if we wanted to put it all in one chart. And then, this is what's been installed and perhaps month, year, and, and predictions for when those installations will be happening, if they're not already in place. Because I think in the main, we want to be able to explain to people who have far less knowledge or understanding, there's sort of this layered approach to augmenting the safety and security of these intersections. And there's really a lot going on. And I think most people don't, just haven't been exposed to the level of detail that obviously we all have. So a chart might be helpful. It's something we could throw up on the city website. And I think it'd really help a lot of people.
Yeah, agreed. A simple timeline that I think shows these, including something that the city and the school district have just implemented in the last 2 weeks, which is the security guards, which are outside of Caltrain's role, but are very significant and probably the most significant for addressing our most recent incidents. I did want to touch on 2 other topics that were in the staff report. One is the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan. So that was on slide number, no, maybe they're not numbered. But this committee a year ago reviewed the plan as it related to rail, both our stations and our crossings. And we provided input on really wanting to see it strengthen as it related to station access. And so I don't know that we know how the plan has responded to our input. And there's no schedule to come back to this committee to give us the update on what it now says versus what it said at the time we reviewed it. Second, since we reviewed it, the council selected the South Palo Alto Bike and Ped crossing for the vicinity of Matadero Creek. And there's work now being done to refine the location. But that becomes a very important part of the plan. I will note that the Planning and Transportation Committee reviewed the plan, which included a whole connection between the east side of the tracks and basically where we would come from El Dorado or wherever, through the bike path that would go through what is formerly called the Fry's area, which an off-road path is already constructed through that area. I was there recently and I was very pleased to see they've constructed that ahead of some of the other construction. And then the notion is that it would connect to El Camino, and then in the plan now has the pursuit of an off-road path in the right-of-way that Valley Water operates in between Stanford Research Park and the backyards of Chamales. The Planning and Transportation Commission, and that whole connection and its relationship to rail, its centrality of rail crossing. Without that rail crossing, that whole thing doesn't serve the community very much. They reviewed a major El Camino housing project on between Matadero and the street just south of it, and they expressed great concern on, and a lot of community members expressed great concern on the bicycle and pedestrian use of those streets that run perpendicular to El Camino, narrow streets with significant bike traffic. There was no transportation department representation there, and no one from staff and no one from the planning commission seemed to be aware that our bike and ped plan has for an off-road path that would in fact serve as an alternative to what they were concerned with. And a lot of this had to do with safe routes to school, kids either going, for instance, to Gunn, or kids coming from Barron Park, crossing in the future, crossing the tracks. So I want to bring that to everyone's attention. I was very concerned that there seems to be a disconnect between the planning we're doing and all the focus on it, and then review of a major project that seemed everyone oblivious to what was in the plan that they had just approved. And for that matter, what's the relationship between the transportation department and the planning department on development as it relates to transportation? And we call this the Planning and Transportation Commission for a reason, that over 20 years, 25 years ago, we integrated those two functions so that they'd look at the two things and how they relate to one another. So I want to draw that attention because I was very concerned with that. And we're going to have recommendations coming to the council that are not reflective of what's in the bike plan as it relates to that project and relates to other similar things.
Chair, I appreciate the point. That said, I do need to ask that we stick to the agenda and help us move through our agenda.
I will, but we have in the staff presentation, the bike and pedestrian transportation plan update. And that's the basis for wanting to share those comments. And I think it is within the basis of the agenda and the staff presentation.
Well, we may need to adjust those presentations in the future, but that said, again, really in the interest of managing our collective time.
City Manager, thank you. I'm chairing the meeting, so I'll make sure that we manage our time.
Okay.
On the quiet zone, I don't want to go into detail today, but I'm interested in when and how we would have a deeper discussion of the quiet zone process and the timing. And it relates to now, when we reviewed the quiet zone previously, we really didn't think of the quiet zone relating to our need for suicide prevention. And it's something that I have been raising to Caltrain leadership, that there is a role, that the horn noise are constant triggers that are a factor in this. We've seen most recently that both the school district and the parent community have very much identified that. So what we already had in our progress of pursuing quiet zones now has a different dimension to it and probably a greater sense of urgency. Then the other thing that we just saw was that we had some additional requirements on the Palo Alto Avenue quiet zone, and all we heard was there was additional work. I had a long meeting with leadership in Atherton to kind of download their very extensive experience in this, and I'd like to be able to follow up offline, and then maybe we schedule something at our next rail committee meeting to go into greater depth on that. Okay. That leads us to our next item, which is our study session on the review of structural and design considerations for Meadow, which is both an earthen berm and a long bridge podium option.
Good evening, Chair, members of the committee, Ripan Bhatia again. So next slide, please. So So today we are discussing the council direction from December 15th, where the council directed us to look at two different options for the Meadow Drive. One was the podium style elevated hybrid alternative, as well as the berm style, earthen berm style option. So we are looking at those two options as it relates to the design consideration and sharing those considerations with the rail committee so that we can get some additional feedback and discussions on those design options as we move forward with the 15% design. Next slide, please. So I'd like to welcome Edgar Torres as well as Jill Gibson. She from Kimley Horn and Caltrain team and kind of integrated team working on this project. So take away, Jill.
Thank you, Ripon. Good afternoon, Rail Committee. Edgar and I wish we were in person today. So as Ripon mentioned, on December 15th, Council selected which alternatives to advance to 15%. So the slide is a summary of that direction. So in short, it included Churchill Avenue as a partial underpass without a landscape strip. And it also included a bicycle and pedestrian undercrossing via the Almost Street ramp. For Meadow Drive, it included a hybrid alternative and direction to explore and analyze both the earthen berm, the short bridge, and the podium style, what we're referring to as the long bridge, which is really the focus of our discussion today. And then finally, for Charleston Road, an underpass with a direct access ramp. Council also directed staff to conduct an implementation study to consider the implications if only the underpass at Charleston Road crossing was constructed. Next slide, please. So just to recap our schedule. So when we last saw you, we received the direction for that first arrow, the direction number 1, to identify the alternatives to advance to 15%. The team is now proceeding with that direction and advancing that 15% design. And so today we're checking in to discuss the Meadow Drive options. And then all of this is working towards the second decision point, really in advance of the 35% design and environmental clearance to provide any update or refinements on which alternatives to proceed to 35%. And all of this aiming towards concluding the 35% design and environmental documentation to be complete at the end of 2027.
All right. For the clerk, may I please share the screen? I have some animation that I'd like to share with the committee.
Yes.
Thank you.
1 second.
Wonderful. See there? All right. Well, good afternoon, Chair Burt, Mayor Lowing, Councilmember Lescott Hames. I wanted to share a few things in preparation for what is this study session and understanding the sort of the design options associated with the hybrid crossing at Meadow Drive. And we'll walk through a little bit more of this and recalling that the tracks will be going up and the roadway going down. And this is in anticipation of of a decision point in the May timeframe. We are advancing both designs of both what we call the earthen berm, or I'm going to say short bridge, and then the podium, which I'll also call the long bridge. And this will allow for us to be able to further analyze not only the engineering requirements, construction requirements, but also understand the costs associated with that, as we will be having an independent cost estimator and understand the schedule and the type of equipment that's going to be necessary to be able to build something that's either a short or a long bridge. On the screen, wanted to highlight a few of the elements of the crossing requirements. First is the fact that for the Meadow hybrid, there will be about 6,500 feet of track modification. That means either horizontal or vertical change in the track. So if the track is being adjusted anyway, we're considering that a modification. So that's approximately 6,500 feet. That includes the modification necessary for Charleston Road with some adjustments there. For the crossing at Meadow Drive itself, there's approximately 3,700 feet of the track being raised 3 feet above its existing grade or the existing ground there. So the bridge itself is about approximately 55 feet wide as a minimum. The track will be raised 16 feet at Meadow Drive, 16 feet above the existing ground, as we previously shared. And the road, Alma Street and Meadow, will be depressed or lowered 7 feet below the existing ground to allow for that 16.5-foot clearance beneath the bridge, between the bridge soffit of the bridge and the roadway itself. So just wanted to provide those approximate dimensions for the group. At the Meadow Drive, the section of the roadway and at the bridge, if you recall, we looked at a minimum of a 3-span bridge, the middle span being effectively dedicated to vehicular traffic, and then the side spans, or the 2 spans at either end, would be dedicated to pedestrians and the cyclists, providing a bike lane, planting strip, and sidewalk. So this is just what we would call sort of the typical section, understanding that the roadway is going to stay the same. And now what we're talking about is how far does that bridge extend and what does that potentially accommodate? So the first section here is going to be about the short bridge, or what we previously referred to as the earthen berm. And just for reference here, excuse me, we had previously shown an aerial where, again, it's retained fill, in other words, dirt behind a retaining wall, the earthen berm itself, with the bridge across Meadow. Now we've looked at a center post and the 2 posts on either side, or a series of columns on either side. The bridge span itself, a total bridge span, is approximately 140 feet. It could be longer, as I had previously mentioned, with the clear space underneath being approximately 125 feet, with that 16 to 16.5 feet clearance. 16 feet where the pedestrians and cyclists are, 16.5 feet in the roadway for the vehicular traffic. On either side of this short bridge is approximately 1,800-foot retaining wall on either side of the railway, starting at 3 feet tall and getting up to approximately 20 feet high. The total bridge and wall length is, as I mentioned, 3,700 feet for that stretch for the hybrid option. In the aerial view, so this is the bird's eye view looking down, you see the bridge width being 55 feet and 125 feet clear for the bridge extent, and the gray area being that retained fill, or that earthen berm on either side of the bridge to be able to support the track infrastructure above. In the elevation view, so think of this as looking at Meadow Drive, you have the retaining wall on either side of the bridge. I'm going to zoom in here a bit. And so the bridge at the top is approximately 140 feet. This is where the track bed is, and that clear space down below is 125 feet. The clearance underneath the bridge soffit is at least 16 feet. We're targeting 16.5. And essentially that retaining wall, in other words, from the roadway at Alma Street, or at that intersection of Alma Street and Meadow, up to the top of the wall is 20 feet. And just to give an example, this is a 2-span option of the bridge at the San Bruno station. Just showing what just a typical concrete girder bridge could look like. This is a shorter span bridge example. For the podium, or the long bridge, this is where we looked at how long can the bridge be for this podium option. And a couple of things that we take into consideration is the ability to maintain the bridge. So where the abutments or the ends of the bridge occurs, there needs to be a minimum of 8 feet for inspection, the ability to access the abutment and be able to, or those foundations, and be able to provide any maintenance and support infrastructure necessary at those locations. So for the long bridge, we're looking at an approximately 490-foot long bridge when meeting that minimum of 8-foot clear at the ends of the bridges. This leaves a space underneath of approximately 475 foot wide, or at least 475 feet along the bridge. And that can vary between 8.5 feet and 16.5 feet. Now, if you recall, the rail is going slightly up, or is going up, and the roadway is going down. So that means that ground underneath the bridge does not have to change. It can be adjusted downward, or it can stay the same. And so that's something that we'll discuss briefly. The retaining walls would be 1,600 feet long on either side, and that would vary from 3 to 17 feet high. The total bridge and wall length, again, 3,700 feet, because the amount of track that's being adjusted is effectively the same. The variables that we are moving or playing with is the length of the bridge versus the length of the retaining wall. In the long bridge option, or the podium long bridge option, you'll see again here where that 475 feet would be placed relative to the intersection of Meadow and Alva. So it creates that longer bridge and then pushes back essentially the retaining walls along the road that 200 feet approximately on either side, or 100, correction, about 130 feet on either side. So in the elevation view, the clear span here is 475 underneath, still being able to meet the minimum requirements underneath the bridge. And then the retaining walls would effectively be 17 feet tall on one side, 15 feet tall on the other. Keep in mind, the reason for that is because of the track elevation. The track is not going to be flat through here. It's going to be on what we call a vertical curve. So it will be transitioning vertically up before transitioning down. And it's not centered on Meadow, it's offset from Meadow. Now, with the long bridge, there is the options of being able to provide different space underneath that longer bridge and be able to adjust the ground or the topography. And so that's something that we can discuss as to whether that is something that the city would consider as worth what likely be the additional expense of a longer bridge. Some key considerations for the group. First, we're going to start with at least preliminary construction considerations, and I'm going to emphasize these are preliminary as we will be working through constructability reviews as well as an independent cost estimate. So with regards to the earthen berm or the short bridge, we know that it's going to be less expensive. Earth, bringing in dirt, building retaining walls is cheaper than the bridge itself, the bridge structure. It'll take less time to construct, and it is easier, if necessary, to widen. If necessary, effectively, the retaining wall that was there can be buried by a new retaining wall to be able to, again, fill and widen the space if necessary. With regards to the long bridge, it is more expensive because the bridge structure itself is more expensive. It takes more time to construct. And in this case, it is also more challenging to widen in the future if necessary, whether it's additional space necessary for Caltrain operations or another function. With regards to maintenance considerations for the short bridge, it is less expensive due to the minimal maintenance of the retaining walls. There's still regular inspections necessary of the retaining wall for structural integrity. There's track at what we call tamping or releveling. In other words, filling in the ballast so that the track can remain well supported. There's generally minimal fatigue due to the earth pressure buffer. In other words, there's less pressure on the wall or on the structure. And there's always weather exposure on one side that has to be inspected. The transition zones, in other words, where we go from retained fill for the earth to a bridge, think of the earth being more flexible and the bridge being stiffer. When that happens, there needs to be a transition space that needs to be monitored so that the train, as it goes from the softer ground to the firmer, stiffer bridge, that has to be properly maintained and monitored so that there isn't too much settlement that could lead to rail breakage. And then effective drainage design is critical. Please note that transition zones are required for both the short and the long bridge because there will be retaining walls on either end of those bridges. With regards to the long bridge, because of the multiple spans and the additional structural parts, it is more complicated to maintain and inspect. It does require regular inspections to check for that wear from train loads on the longer spans. The durable concrete structure with its durable concrete structure with components that could be replaced over time or patched if necessary. There are some higher long-term costs due to the specialized repair of bridge structures and the inspection access associated with that. Now, as I mentioned, what we're talking about is the length of the bridge itself over meadow and on either side of meadow. So either way, there's going to be retaining walls and a bridge. The question is how long between the two? So with regards to the retaining walls, there's ways to be able to do textured or treated wall facades, being able to do integrated planting or green screening, or the potential for mural or public art treatments as appropriate. And then the space underneath the bridge, and this would be whether it's a short bridge or a long bridge, we'll need to look into what landscaping could occur there, what type of integrated lighting is going to be at the roadway and the active transportation or ped and bike facilities versus outside of those spaces. And then the architectural treatments of the columns themselves with the bridge. Just to give a few examples of, now this is not exhaustive, there's going to be more discussion on the types of treatments as the design progresses into 35% design and more importantly into final design. There are ways in which there could be architectural treatments or even landscape treatments with regards to the wall to soften or even break apart the cadence or the length of the wall. The example on the left is in San Carlos at the station itself, and the example on the right is at a multi-use path along a highway, in this case showing a much longer retaining wall. Some summary of the considerations, and we're very glad to answer questions in more detail, is that for the most part, as I mentioned, is what we're talking about is how long the bridge will be. We're looking at least 120-foot wide bridge with the short bridge as one end of the bracket and 475 feet long on the long bridge as the other side or the other bracket. And that still leaves 1,600 to 1,800 feet of retaining wall on either side. The construction costs are generally going to be lower for the shorter the bridge is. The maintenance costs will likely be lower as well. And then the aesthetics are going to depend on what's done with the space outside of the roadway and in the active transportation space and into any open or available space beyond that. As I mentioned, future corridor expansion, if necessary, is easier with the short bridge and more difficult with the longer the bridge is. And go ahead, Jill.
Just in conclusion, kind of the 6-month look ahead. So the team is advancing the 15% plan development. as Edgar mentioned, soon to be starting the construction's cost and schedule development. And then again, here discussing Meadow Drive today, and then in May, anticipating coming back to discuss the 15% design update, and then walk through the elements of the 35% scope. Also would like to, and we'll get into this, I think, in discussion, would like to kind of understand in May general preference from what we discussed today of the two options. And then anticipating coming back in August with that 15% design and independent cost estimate and schedule update, all aiming towards a September City Council meeting for City Council to provide the direction in advance of the team launching into that 35% design and environmental documentation phase of the project. And that concludes our presentation. And we'll open it up to discussion.
Thank you. So why don't we first see if we have any questions to staff, then we'll hear from the public and then have our discussion. Any questions? Ed?
I think this qualifies for what you're asking for. You went through these things and I had written down basically the slides that you my question was basically around the slides that you presented with respect to the considerations, except that I also wrote down, besides how much does it cost, how much longer is the construction. The third thing I wrote down was eminent domain. So is there any difference in eminent domain for either of these?
There is no difference in the additional property needed.
That's kind of what I expected. So if you just look at the considerations side by side, I'm not seeing much in favor of the longer bridge. So the question is, what did I miss? Because there's so many more advantages of lower cost and lower construction time. Is there anything substantive that we think is arguing in favor of the long one? And we can ask other questions later, but
I think that the key advantage is some people find it better aesthetically.
Okay.
As somebody who was in favor of the concept of the hybrid option, including an earthen wall or a podium, it was coming out of the viaduct mindset. A viaduct would be a higher podium, basically. And we were told that this hybrid could also include a podium style support, which does then, it's not just, I think aesthetics is a piece, but it's also the sense that maybe there's more light. Maybe, you know, the eye at the level of cars and bikes and peds can see through for a greater distance, which the longer earthen wall does not support. So I think that's what we were trying to correct. I mean, Pat will have his own views on this, but that's kind of where I was coming from, with some enthusiasm about this aspect of the hybrid option.
Had a couple questions. One was, there were notes and there was a T.Y. Lin report that I guess this presentation is based on, or is that right? Or what's the relationship between what we had in the staff report from the T.Y. Lin report?
So T.Y. Lin looked at structurally what would be required from both options and what are the basis of the design, and those considerations led to the other factors that Edgar discussed about the design considerations, trying to seek feedback from the rail committee.
So whether it was their report or the Kimberly Horn analysis, one of the things that was noted was that, and it may be a moot point, but I just wanted to make sure we had this out there, that the Long Bridge would be less amenable to being able to add future tracks, basically a subsequent bridge, right? That would be on the outside of it. But one of the big things that we went through in recent years was needing to get from Caltrain the locations of prospective passing tracks should high-speed rail come. And those passing tracks are basically now identified as being north of Meadow. And so why would this even be a consideration of needing additional tracks?
Thank you, Chair Burt. It's not necessarily just a consideration of additional tracks, is that per Caltrain's criteria and policy is to be able to utilize the full extent of its right-of-way, albeit depending on the need. And per the rail corridor use policy, that does identify this area still as potential use for rail operations, not necessarily the passing tracks for high-speed rail, which had been identified as being north of Meadow.
Okay, so that then goes to, in part, my next question on over the previous 2 to 3 years, as Caltrain had initially engaged with us and we transitioned from the work that AECom had done into Caltrain taking on, we got the initial kind of a design criteria from Caltrain and how it actually severely impacted the grade separation alternatives that we had been considering. And one of the big things was Caltrain needing to reserve the entire width of the corridor. Then we said, well, that included earth and berm. In this case, it's what's the corridor width? 100 and something feet at pardon me?
It's 100 feet, 95 to 100 feet.
Okay, at this area, and the earth and berm going the entire width of the corridor rather than what Caltrain has in San Carlos and Belmont, which is an earthen berm that is really designed for the width of the dual tracks at a much higher cost and higher impacts. And so this is one of the areas we had talked about at Caltrain at a policy level, needing to address conflicting policies between policies, the corridor crossing strategy that purports to support grade crossings and other policies on preserving the entire real estate. Caltrain has not reconciled those. I hope that we will do that this year. But has there been any other discussion? I had thought that we were going to see progress on re-examining how wide that earthen berm had to be. And so I don't know whether that's something that Edgar can answer or our staff in it, but I didn't realize that this was going to come back again with an earthen berm that is far wider than is needed for the tracks. It's a convenience for Caltrain's maintenance and operations.
So with regards to the width of the retained fill or the earthen berm, yes, we're showing it currently as part of 15% design as being wider. And that's in the with the intent of having a more conservative footprint with regards to the environmental reviews. So that at the end of 15%, when that drawing set is complete, that can be handed to the environmental team and worked with the environmental team to understand the environmental considerations of the wider retaining walls. That does not preclude the retaining walls being narrower. In other words, having a narrower earthen berm, it's to allow for, again, disclosure of what those potential construction period impacts would be for the wider space.
Okay, that's helpful. So these renderings are not necessarily the current thinking on the design. It is really as broad as the impacts might be. Is that?
That's accurate. So where that final wall would be placed would be as part of a discussion and future discussions between the city and Caltrain. Okay,
thank you. And then one other question on the vertical clearance for the underpass. we have it as 16 feet, 6 inches. And for several years, we've been at really, as we looked at all the locations, looking at what might be ideal from one standpoint versus lower costs and lower impacts on the community if the vertical clearance instead of 16.6 might be 15 or 14.6. So what's the reason that the 16 feet 6 inches is in this presentation?
Yes, it's again similar to the width of the earthen berm. The taller, the greater the separation between the road and the bottom of the bridge, in other words, 16.5 feet, the more that vertical change in the railroad occurs, the higher or the bigger the difference is vertically, the longer that transition occurs. As you recall, I showed a 6,500 feet track transition. So from an environmental review, it allows us to be able to see where the area of potential effect would be, how far that would stretch out, what type of construction would be necessary at different distances from the crossings. And then, as you recall, we have presented that there is the option of going down to 15.5 feet with essentially a protective girder, protective beam to ensure that the bridge is not struck, as it's considered a critical asset. If the bridge were to be out of commission or taken out of commission, it essentially shuts down service until it's confirmed it can handle the load of not only passenger rail but freight. So in this case, this allows us to again have that more conservative footprint. And as the environmental review is underway, we then look at how to be able to then bring that in by reducing it down to 15.5 feet. That's what's allowed, at least right now, via the Caltrain design criteria. Anything that's less than that would require a rigorous analysis and risk analysis for a variance.
Okay.
So that's part of the 15% is to, again, look at what that footprint would be, and then as we enter a 35% design, begin to make the adjustments.
Okay, so thanks. I will say that when reading the presentations and the staff review, I didn't come away with an appreciation of what you've clarified, that what we're getting here today is kind of the outer window of what would be considered for the environmental review. I don't think I saw that in any of the presentations. So that frames it very differently. One other framing that I just want to make sure the public understands is when the council gave its fairly recent direction on how to proceed on the 15% and then the 35% review, they elected to, I'll say that we had discussions and it's become more likely that from a funding standpoint, there is not going to be funding perhaps to do even 2 grade separations. And so what we wanted to do was look at the alternatives of a hybrid versus an underpass, but rather than go through the expenditure of looking at them at both Charleston and Meadow, we said, okay, at Meadow, we'll look at the hybrid, and at Charleston, we'll look at the underpass, but without a predetermination of which of those locations would be the prioritization for if we were only able to construct one. And so we conceivably could have a hybrid at Charleston or conceivably an underpass at Meadow. But that's not how we elected to study it to be cost effective, is my memory.
That's correct. I will provide some clarification here. We are looking at the possibility of either being constructed independently if as necessary due to funding, as well as them occurring at the same time, to see if there's any economies of scale or construction efficiencies that can be at least presented to the City Council.
Yep. Thanks for that reminder.
But I'd like to add, I think our understanding is that it's going to be underpass at Charleston and hybrid, or hybrid at Meadow, but they could be built separately or together. So that is my understanding. I'm not sure if we were doing a hybrid at Charleston because that would have different layouts and especially for the transitions and embankments. If that was to be, if that was not my understanding of the council direction.
Well, I think we'll want to review that. Yeah, okay. Do we have members of the public who would like to speak?
If any member of the public would like to speak on item 1, please raise your hand or press star 9 now. We currently have 6 requests to speak. Our first speaker is Eric N., followed by Melvita M.
Okay, and we'll go up to 3 minutes, but if you don't need a full 3 minutes, that's great.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Norman. I wanted to talk about the grade issues associated with the burn. The most recent Caltrain proposal had a berm length of 6,400 feet with a 16-foot maximum height over the ground. So 3,200 feet over 16 feet, that ends up being a 0.5% grade. The May 2024 hybrid plan profile had a 1% grade, as you can see in the image below. Typical maximum trade grades are 1 to 2.2%, although they do go up to 4.7%. The high-speed rail typically has a maximum grade of 3.5 to 4%. So there's various sort of grades. Next slide. So I decided that it made sense to draw the sort of these different options to scale. Obviously, the vertical scale is different than the horizontal scale. And so the first is the 0.5% grade with the standard bridge. The second one being showing the long bridge. And then when you go to a 1% grade, the berm gets significantly shorter, 2% dramatically shorter. So if you really want to reduce the impact of the berm, increasing the grade is the way to go. It also seems like it should dramatically decrease costs considerably. It's 4 times, if going to 2% from 0.5% is 4 times less dirt to be hauled back and forth, et cetera. The comment on the sort of long bridge, I have a daughter who lives in Portland, and they found that they needed to place large rocks underneath the bridge structures to keep people from camping there. And so it's something to consider when you're talking about what are we going to use that space for. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Melvita M., followed by John M.
Linda McGee here. Wow, what can I say? The most encouraging news I've heard today is that maybe there won't be money to do this. So that would make me very happy. As you know, I've been advocating for quiet zones for a long time. And in my lifetime and getting older every day, I would just like to get a good night's sleep without the horn blowing. So whatever we can do to facilitate that. I have a question for Kimberly Horn on the images and the examples that they're showing. That I'm familiar with some of them, but none of them seem to reflect our neighborhood, Palo Alto. And I just wonder if there can be some images that would actually look at Google Earth and show us with our specific houses what these ideas would look like. So I think that would be good. And just, yeah, if we could just see some examples of what this would look like instead of just looking at a wall or looking at San Carlos or Belmont or Solana Beach, which have no relation to our city and our neighborhoods. And just as an aside, if I was going back to graduate school to get a PhD, I would, my topic would be how a commuter rail can terrorize and destroy neighborhoods in a beautiful city. So hopefully I may not be around to see what's going to happen to our neighborhood. But anyway, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate Mr. Burt and talking about getting the quiet zones for Churchill soon. Thank you.
Our next speaker is John M., followed by Roland.
Hello, I'm John Melnichuk, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here. I'm quite skeptical about this process at this time. I have a strong disagreement with it overall. So far, it seems to me decisions have been made on the basis of budget alone. What's possible with the budget we might be able to raise, rather than the value judgment about what would be good for our city. Because what we're talking about here is erecting a Berlin Wall for 3,600 feet in my neighborhood. It's going to turn it into a slum. And we're getting bullied by Caltrain and its engineering requirements. I'm not happy about it at all. There's no discussion about noise, which is continually a problem. There's no discussion about loss of privacy. There's no discussion about dust. There's no discussion about daylight, sunlight interference so far in the decision-making. There's no discussion of lost property values. We're going to have a scar in the city, 3,600 feet long. If this goes forward, we could trench it. Even if it was more expensive, it might be worth doing. We could tunnel it, but it has to be a regional cooperation. We're trying to organize something in $1 billion project to cut our city in half without coordinating with our neighbors to the north or to the south. We're really only talking to Caltrain. And I'm not confident that the decision-making process that got us here is satisfactory. And I'm feeling very worried about it. Caltrain is the worst neighbor I've ever had. Well, any question? Thank you.
Our next speaker is Roland, followed by Adrian B. Roland, you now have permission to unmute yourself.
Thank you, and good afternoon. So what I would like to do is to very briefly circle back to the not terribly successful presentation I had them to make the last time this came to council, which to use a completely different approach to the way a viaduct gets built, specifically arches, which are constructed as precast segments, approximately 10 foot in length. And these segments are manufactured off-site. So that pretty much eliminates a lot of the issues that you've got with on-site constructions, pouring concrete and God knows what else. What this brings to you is you're not going to have 4 to 8 years of construction. You're most probably going to be done with doing both Meadow and Charleston in approximately a couple of years. You don't need 2 flies. The widening, if you ever need it, is basically achieved by just running the exact same structure parallel to it. Each viaduct is a 2-track structure. You're never going to have a Berlin Wall that's going to cut Palo Alto in half. But the issue in closing is that you need to bring in a team which is familiar with this kind of construction. So if you look at my account on Zoom, I can see it there. That is the BIJLMER, spelled BIJLMER station in Amsterdam. I have no idea why VJ never visited that station. And the company who designed it is called Grimshaw, who have worked many times in very good harmony with Arab. So you can look it up on their website. Another reference project would be the Colne, spelled C-O-L-N-E, viaduct on the high-speed line between London and Birmingham. It is really spectacular, once again, designed by Grimshaw and engineered by Arab. That's my recommendation moving forward. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Adrian B., followed by Stefan R. Adrian, you now have permission to unmute yourself.
Thank you and good afternoon, committee members. I just wanted to hit a few points. There was discussion about the ability to widen the berm versus the long bridge. The way railroads have done this in the past to widen structures, it's quite easy with a little bit of advanced planning, such as on the Dumbarton line that Samtrans owns. Southern Pacific made the bridge bents that support the bridge structures 4 tracks. Well, they made it 2 tracks wide. In this case, you could easily, at very marginal extra cost, make the support structures 4 tracks wide and only drop in bridges for the 2 tracks that we have today, making it relatively easy to drop in extra bridge segments on top of the supports for later track widening should that ever be necessary. Switching to Eric M. covered it very nicely. Eric N. Sorry, the first speaker. That struck me is I have no idea why such tepid grades were used. Caltrain recently relaxed the engineering standards such that grades, I believe it's up to 2% are allowed now, and certainly it should be at least a full 1%, which was the most conservative previous standard. That was suitable for freight trains as well. Easily, the high-speed rail trains and Caltrain in the future can easily handle much more aggressive grades with no problem whatsoever, and that would greatly reduce the ramping distance and the extent of the project. It's just needlessly wide right now at 6,400 feet or whatever it was. This, of course, would shorten the approaches and allow for both shorter approaches or to go fully elevated over the roads, which by going up just another 7 feet would eliminate all the utility issues of involved with lowering the roads and the streets, neighboring property impacts, and permanent pumping and draining issues that are created by lowering streets. And we know what that can be like. Already there were a couple fatalities with flooded grade separations on the Caltrain line in past years. So it would be worth using a steeper grade and having a shorter project and fully elevating to have more usable space underneath if in fact you go with the longer bridge. On the comment about clearance that Councilman Burt raised, I would point out that Tilton Avenue in San Mateo and Diablo Avenue in San Mateo, Tilton has 8 feet 6 inches, Diablo has 13 feet 2-inch clearance with the sacrificial beam. So those are recently rebuilt, and that's completely possible. So look at Street View for an example. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Stefan R., followed by Mike F. Stefan, you now have permission to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, council members and staff. My name is Steve Roseblum. Yeah, I'd like to comment also similar to what Adrian just talked about and what the issues that Council Member Lowing and Lithcott-Hames brought up. The question is, why are we considering the podium, the long podium at all? It's not really any significant improvement over the short bridge. And as Adrian pointed out, if we were to raise the bridge height by 7 feet, we would eliminate completely the need to depress any streets at all, which eliminates the need to do any property takings or utility relocations or risk flooding or any sorts of problems like that. And I think that would be the advantage of the long podium, make it a real podium that eliminates depressing the street. And I think with regard to what John Melnichuk said, he's mistaken about the noise. The study the city has done on noise shows that an elevated train produces less noise at ground level than a train at ground level. So he should look at those studies and find out the facts about the noise issue. The question about the viaduct, is really something that needs to be revisited because as is clear, the length of the bridge is not really that advantageous if we still have to depress the roadway. So I would strongly urge you to, if you're going to consider the long podium at all, to consider that as the option without depressing the street at all, and raise the bridge by 7 feet. And also, as was pointed out by Councilmember Burke, we should consider lower underpass heights so that would limit the need to make the bridge so high. And I think the idea of designing the system from the outset to meet the maximum possible environmental impact is not really very sensible. The goal of a project should be to minimize the environmental impact from the start and not to maximize it. I think this is backward thinking. So I would urge Caltrain to stop doing this and to actually look at what's really needed for the project and not how to take up the maximum amount of space possible. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mike F., followed by Jerry Yu.
Hi, my name is Mike Forster. I live in Evergreen Park. I have 2 comments and then a couple questions regarding the presentation. One is I agree with Roland that a viaduct approach using advanced accelerated bridge construction where you precast the modules off-site and assemble them like Legos on-site has a lot of advantages. I submitted a report to the City Council on Transportation this past weekend about exactly that topic. Second, I agree with the other comments. If we're going to raise the tracks at all, might as well raise them another 7 feet and eliminate the need to lower the roadways, which eliminates a lot of the problems people have mentioned, taking of properties, utilities, water, and so on. My questions about the presentation seem to support that. If I recall correctly from the presentation about the long bridge, I think the presenter said that the city would have the option to lower the streets or not, even in their current design. And second, they presented the picture of the San Bruno Avenue as an example of what it could look like. And unless I'm mistaken, the San Bruno Avenue did exactly that. They raised the tracks enough so they didn't have to lower the roadway at all. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Our last speaker is Jerry Yu. Jerry, you now have permission to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to comment here. I live just across El Camino from the crossing there at Meadow and have heard the signals of distress and experienced during these cycles of suicides on the track and seen the efforts of people to have volunteers stay there or policing the area. I feel so sad for folks who are considering some of those same options that do not yet seem to be successful. And yet it may be the only thing that's available to us at this point, except maybe the technical solutions that have been proposed that I thought had already been installed. So where I want to go on this is to go to Mike Forster's paper. His matrix shows the advantage on most items of the matrix goes to viaduct on a large proportion of those scores. So here's my point. Some people have questioned whether there's going to be a budget for doing anything, whether we can, and citizen comments that indicate they don't want to put out the money even for this. Some are saying, well, let's not do anything. I'm going to take that as a jump off point and say, if we don't get what we need for the future, don't build now. Wait. Try to get through whatever it is between now and then. But this is to be built for the future, not for 2026. Because there's a long time before anything is going to be appearing and be used there. So take a close look at the viaduct option again, if at all possible. And it will take leadership because it would have to overcome a lot of community resistance built on the initial portrayal of what a viaduct is. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Thank you. And to help frame our discussion, I wanted to ask this issue that some of the speakers raised on how broad the range of options should be that we're looking at for the environmental review purpose. And as Edgar stated, that this has been presented with the broadest range. I mean, hypothetically, we could be broader yet. But for example, I had not appreciated until Eric Nordman brought it up that this actually is based on a 0.5% grade. And we had a lot of discussions on, previously we had looked at a 1% grade with a very strong inclination to be pursuing a 2% grade. And we had progress with Caltrain on that and their design standards, as I recall. So can you give us some guidance on what we ought to, what's the scope of what we ought to be looking at environmentally?
Yeah, Edgar can help us. The slopes are much higher, and there are like higher slopes, but the vertical curves and the horizontal combination creates that need for the longer spans. But Edgar, if you can provide more explanation to the length of the spans for these transitions.
Yes, so there's there's 3 factors that play into how long the horizontal and vertical transitions are. So first factor is how much the elevation change is going to be. So in this case, with the hybrid, by splitting it between the railroad and the road, it's less of a vertical change for the railroad. So that's one factor. The second factor is that the vertical curves, so a train is steel wheel on steel rail, cannot make changes abruptly. That's just the reality of physics. And so in this case, those vertical curves transitioning, say, from 0% grade up to, say, 1 or more than 1%, in fact, one approach is at about 0.8%, and the other approach is at over 1.2%. The reason why is because those vertical curves are controlled, or from a physics perspective, controlled by the freight design. In other words, those freight cars cannot change vertically as easily as, say, the passenger rail. For passenger rail, those vertical curves can be shorter. So because Union Pacific does have operating rights on this corridor, this is historically, as being the original operator as Southern Pacific, has track rights to operate on this corridor, and so it needs to be accommodated. So those vertical curves are effectively, the design is controlled or essentially constrained by those freight car vertical curves. The second another factor is the horizontal curves. So the horizontal curves, the lateral transitions, those are effectively controlled by passenger rail. In this case, the higher speed, in this case, being able to get Caltrain up to 110 miles per hour, that higher speed requires smoother transitions to avoid what we call a jerk or jerk rate. That allows for a more comfortable passenger experience to be able to operate at a higher speed. And the third component from a track geometry perspective is that those vertical curves and those horizontal curves cannot overlap or coincide. They need to be in separate locations so as to be the vertical change is on a straight path horizontally, the horizontal change is on a straight path vertically. And so that allows for that effectively what requires these longer distances. Now, the more that elevation change occurs, the longer the vertical curves will be and the longer the extents are. So the hybrid allows for a balanced or a middle ground to be able to allow for that. Again, less of a length of potential impact. And yes, we are going to take advantage of being able to go up to 2% as the design allows. So if, for example, as Chair Burt had mentioned, what if we go to a lower vertical clearance? The question then would be, is that an adjustment in the roadway up, or is that an adjustment in the railroad down? So that is something that we will continue to explore upon completion of the 15% design.
Okay, and the question about how broad and kind of worst case scenarios we should be including in what's being considered for the environmental analysis. Are you comfortable that we're not going beyond what we really need to consider, the options that we essentially have ruled out?
So in this case, the footprint is to allow for the construction to take place, because if construction goes out of that footprint, then additional environmental review is required. So there's a balancing act between what can be environmentally cleared as a quote unquote disturbed space, and then what is going to be what we consider as a reasonably expected project. So that's going to be the balancing act that we can discuss as upon completion of 15% design.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues? Julie?
Mr. Torres, I want to thank you for your great explanation in response to the chair's questions. That just visual on the horizontal curves and the vertical curves, they can't happen at the same time, was very helpful in understanding why the ability to increase grade is not maybe as clear or obvious as it may seem. I'm looking for that kind of clarity on the questions that have been raised about the logic of the hybrid, the train going up 16 or so, the road going down 7 or so, when if you just took that 7 feet and gave it to the train, we wouldn't have this issue of property takings. We wouldn't have this issue of moving the utilities and potential for flooding. I realize sort of train has left the station on this question because we're not considering that. We're considering hybrid, and yet these questions have been raised in the context of the berm versus the podium, and it's basically an extended, berm or podium, extending that higher into the air. So I'm just wondering if you might have an answer that's similar to the prior question, which is here's why that won't work. But because so many public commenters did sort of aver that would be a logical solution, solving a bunch of problems and potentially being cheaper, I think we owe it to ourselves to hear from you on that, please.
So there's a few things to consider here. One is that, again, the greater the vertical change to the track, the longer those transitions will take, especially if we go steeper. So it becomes a balancing act between grade and the length of the vertical curves, or the length of those curves, to allow for that reasonable transition for safety purposes, especially with freight railroad going over this increased elevation. That's one. Second, excuse me, with regards to saying methods of construction, say precast segments, and essentially using sort of post-tensioning techniques. That's typically used when the track is either at a consistent grade, in other words, tangent vertically. Essentially, think of a straight line when doing the vertical change, and tangent horizontally. This is to be able to essentially, when they think of the Lego blocks, it's actually not where they're connected, they're interlocked, but then they're compressed, they're pushed together. That's not as easy to do when you have both horizontal and vertical changes to your track, to your guideway geometry. And so that is something that is going to be explored in terms of construction methods for the bridge as part of 35% design, as part of subsequent design. We will have identified both cast in place, precast girders, precast segments, potentially through girder bridge, truss bridges. We will look at different types of bridges and construction methods, identifying them as part of 15% design so that they can be evaluated as part of the environmental review and those technical studies. Bridge construction, we've done accelerated bridge construction. They can be those precast bridges. The challenge with anything accelerated is the need for space. We are not in a very space generous location. We have neighbors' homes on the west side, Alma Street on the east side, of which some of that will be utilized for the shoe fly or a potential shoe fly for the hybrid. Now, there's been discussions that it could be constructed parallel to the tracks. In either case, we have clearance requirements necessary away from the railroad and away from the road. So that's the reason why we, as part of the sort of preliminary review, coordination with Rail Committee, almost 2 years ago now, we did explore what that would mean in terms of potential space necessary. And it's not as easy as it's been described. In fact, it takes a great deal of space. And one thing to note, and any contractor will tell you this, the more constrained the environment it is, the more difficult it is to construct, the more expensive it is. The production rates do not yield. So what we look for is the ability to provide the contractor that space in order for the production rates to go up and the schedule to improve.
Thank you.
Ed?
Yeah, I have a couple to start with. Could you give us any sort of sensitivity analysis on the gain or loss as you're trying to sink the road lower? So if you go down 2 inches, is it X, but 4 inches and it's 5X, it gets exponentially more expensive when you drop it? Or is it a fixed cost? I mean, what's the order of magnitude between level and, 3 inches, 6 inches, 12 inches?
I wish it were that easy to
I was hoping it was.
to provide those ratios. What I can say is this: the lowering of 7 feet does affect many, I'm going to say, dry utilities. This is your fiber optics, your electrical, some water lines, but essentially anything lowering the road more than, say, 3 feet would effectively would affect those utilities as well.
Right.
And so any deeper, you start affecting your substantially affecting your storm drains, your sewers, your sewer lines, essentially what we call your larger gravity systems. The storm drain's already affected here, but because the depression is relatively small, I'm putting that in quotations, of 7 feet, there's ways in which to be able to design redundancy in the storm drain system to be able to accommodate larger storm events. And that is something that's already being taken into consideration now as part of the 15% design. Normally that could be something that's can wait until 35%. We felt that it was important for us to be able to understand the challenges associated with the stormwater, especially with large rain events, to be able to start addressing those particular issues as part of 15% design. So there will be a technical report associated with that, sharing that with the Rail Committee and the City Council as part of 15% package.
Okay.
I would say that's what we're looking at. Once you get below 3 feet, you're effectively incurring that utility cost.
Okay, and then going back to the original slides when we were talking about the more cost for the longer bridge, could you give us an order of magnitude of the cost differences between the short bridge and the long bridge, just as you've drawn it up?
We don't have those differences yet, and we are currently in the process of getting the independent cost estimator to be able to review that so that we can provide that information to the rail committee, either as an information item as part of the next meeting or as part of our full package in May.
Okay, so not even order of magnitude. You don't know if it's going to be 10 times more.
I can give you a difference, at least with regards to the bridge versus the retaining wall, which is about 3.5 to 1. In other words, $3.50 to $1 for extending the bridge versus a retaining wall. But there's what we are doing with our independent cost estimators to understanding some of the construction benefits or challenges associated with either, so that we can price it with what we would expect as the reasonable production rates for building it.
Okay, and a couple of sort of tag teaming with one or two comments that Julie made. A couple of the public commenters have talked about how you can sort of just bring in these viaduct structures pre-built and sort of stick them in and we're good to go. I'm sure you're going to say it's also not that easy on that issue. But
so, yes.
How are you feeling about that?
We are going to explore precast elements, but one thing to consider is when we're looking at precast elements or precast segments, it's the ability to get them to the site and then be able to move those pieces within the site. And so right now there is an active railroad. There's the potential of an active shoe fly. And so that's it becomes difficult to work with both the OCS and getting those components in place. That's a closely coordinated and practically orchestrated movement of materials to be able to do so and get them into the site safely, and to be able to do it as I guess the best way to describe it, to do so in a manner that's as the least disruptive to the neighbors, because again, we are very close to homes here.
Yeah. Okay. I remember when we got a bridge part for the bridge that went over 101. It took us months, and then we had to stop it and park it in Vegas and things like that. So that's a minor version of what you're talking about. So I'm still having any trouble getting excited about the longer bridge, given of what I see of positives on the reduction of property acquisition and as a starting point, but also just the costs involved there. Order of magnitude 3.5x. For those public commenters that said, basically, don't hurry, let's get it right. That's 50% of the public. The other 50% says, pick something and get it done. And we're not going to do either one. I mean, we're going to get it right as best as we can. And nothing's going to be interest. Someone referenced 2026. That's not anywhere on the radar. So this is still going to take a while to get to a conclusion, not to mention building it. That's all for now.
Thanks. So first I want to follow up on Ed's question on the long bridge and whether we should spend any more time or money pursuing that. So if the consensus of this committee was that we shouldn't, procedurally, how do we get that to council or not?
I don't know that that's even on the council's radar screen as a issue for debate. I think it could be rolled into whatever your next progress update is.
Yeah, Julie?
I think it is on the radar because we did raise it in the council meeting. We did ask at that meeting that come back here. So, but I also agree that could just be rolled into the next update.
So I guess I'd like to know from both, based on the information we received today, what does Kimberly Horn think? What does our staff think? What do the colleagues think on whether any more time or money should be spent on that?
you hear the question? No, whether we should stop or further evaluations needed. Let's start with our Kimley Horn team on their recommendation.
I would say that we now understand the bookends of how long the bridge can be given the track geometry and the roadway geometry. And so I would say that we can start with the shorter bridge. And as the design advances and there's more need for, say, creating either additional landscaping or other features that are safe, secure, then we can lengthen that bridge a bit more. There's at least nothing precluding that in the future. So we can start with the short bridge and then be able to go to a longer bridge as necessary.
Ripon, any thoughts? Or?
Yeah, if the rail committee makes the recommendations to the staff or to the council for selection of the short bridge as a preferred alternative, then that may be something that we could bring it back to the council for approval.
Okay, so, and I'm assuming that we really would need the council to buy into that, city manager?
Well, I think what I heard Oscar suggest was, Edgar, my apologies, was to use this as an input in the continuing design refinement. And based on what comes out of that refinement, I think that would drive the decision on what type of bridge would be necessary. So again, I don't know that it's a definitive action at this point.
Yeah, the way he was describing it wasn't that we would be precluding it. And if that's the case, does that mean it really doesn't need to go back to the council for their concurrence?
Not at this point, right?
Okay, all right. And let me ask my colleagues, are we aligned that we'd like the focus to be on the short bridge, not the long bridge?
Yeah, as I say, I can't see any reason to pursue the long bridge.
Same.
Good. Okay. Got one thing we all agreed on. And then, as I look at the recommendation for today, it was for us to provide feedback on structural and design considerations for the metal hybrid. And so not merely kind of the boundaries of the environmental analysis, but on those options. As Edgar noted, one of the key drivers, there's several drivers on what creates the length of a berm and consequently the cost and environmental impacts. And a key one is the vertical curve, and that's really driven by freight and the freight speed, and for that matter, freight weight as well. So we have to take what are the operating conditions of the freight today. But I recall that one of the things that we've talked and raised as an issue with Caltrain is UP has operating rights there, but my memory is the operating rights don't say you can operate at a given speed or that you can operate at a given max weight. And those are going forward extremely important negotiations or stipulations. And I think we need to have from Caltrain a feedback on what really we believe would be negotiating prerogatives with UP that would reduce our costs and construction and design impacts if we moderated the freight speed and or weight. And sorry, just I wanted to ask on the whole issue of the clearance. We have one, what would we do with the benefits of a reduced clearance? And it's really the distance from the bottom of the roadway to the top of the tracks. So there's both the clearance for vehicles to go under. Do we need 16.6 or 15.6 or even 14.6? And then how thick is the bridge? And I recall that we had talked, and I think this was more with Churchill, about designs like through girder bridges that basically shrink the underbelly of the bridge with the distance to the top of the tracks. So is that something that we'll be looking at subsequently as we try to look at kind of how we reduce that, whether it's the clearance or the design or a combination of the two? Is that's going to be part of what we look at? Is that correct?
Yes, I believe we are looking at all the various options for the bid depth. So, but Edgar, can you touch upon if there are any variations of the bridge depth that we are looking at this time with the different designs?
Not at this point. However, that is something that we have identified as the one of the variables or factors to look at is essentially where the superstructure, the support structure is on top. In other words, that could be a truss bridge or an arch bridge. So we are taking that into consideration to be able to thin up the deck. There are some limitations with that, but we are exploring that as once we have the 15% complete, we explore that as part of the 35% design.
Okay. And my final question, Edgar, as you described, today we were looking at kind of the outer boundaries of what would be considered for environmental review. But when do we really see what are kind of the alternatives for optimized designs where we would be minimizing the clearance potentially, minimizing the superstructure, minimizing the length of the berm because of vertical, optimizing vertical grade and vertical curve? When will we see that?
We will be beginning that particular work in the fall after we present the 15% package to City Council.
Okay, so that follows the 15% package. I think
that is correct.
We wish it was sooner, but we'll accept that. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you very much. That concludes this item. And then just future meetings and agendas. We just want to review our next dates and prospective agenda topics.
So for the next meeting, we have grade separation projects and the Charleston Alma safety improvements. And we might also bring quiet zones.
Very good.
Late.
And that date is?
12th of May.
Okay. On that note, we're adjourned. Thank you.